Imagine spending $96 million on a website. For that price, you would expect a digital masterpiece, a platform that predicts your needs before you click. But what if that $96 million investment resulted in a product that was slower, harder to use, and objectively worse than the decade-old site it replaced? This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is exactly what happened in Australia, and the consequences were far more severe than just frustrated users. On October 22, 2025, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, known as the BOM, flipped the switch on their massive overhaul. This is a public utility that millions of people rely on daily, not just to check if they need an umbrella, but to decide whether to evacuate their homes during floods or fires. The launch was supposed to be a triumph of modernization. Instead, it became a perfect storm of failure. Almost immediately, the backlash began. Farmers, commuters, and storm watchers flooded social media. They weren't just annoyed, they were furious. The new site was sluggish, the navigation was confusing, and critical radar views that rural communities used daily were suddenly buried, simplified, or completely gone. It was a user experience disaster happening in real time. To understand how this happened, we have to look at the money. When the headlines screamed about a $96 million website, the public was rightly outraged. But the breakdown of that budget reveals the first major problem. Nearly $80 million went into back-end supercomputing and data systems. $12 million went to security and testing. And the actual front-end redesign? The part the public actually sees and touches, that received just $4.1 million. This financial imbalance created a massive disconnect. The Bureau built an enterprise-grade weather platform, a beast of data processing, capable of ingesting satellite feeds and ocean buoy data. But they wrapped it in a user interface that felt like a cheap, unfinished web app. They spent millions on the engine, but forgot to put a steering wheel in the car. The timing of the launch could not have been worse. It coincided with the peak of Australia's storm season. Victoria was facing severe storms, extreme heat waves were rolling across the continent, and severe tropical cyclone Fina was looming offshore. At the exact moment the country needed clarity and speed, the Bureau gave them a puzzle. Let's talk about the radar. For years, Australians had muscle memory for the old site. They could load a storm trajectory, track cells frame by frame, and see detailed overlays in seconds. The new design buried that detail behind extra clicks. It slowed down the animations. It removed the trajectory indicators that pilots and emergency volunteers relied on. A quick check turned into a spinning wheel ordeal. This wasn't just about convenience. For a farmer, a radar that lags by several minutes or hides rainfall intensity can mean lost crops or stranded machinery. For a mariner off the coast, unable to quickly load wind data on a mobile connection, it changes the risk calculation of being at sea. Critics argued that by prioritizing a modern look over raw data density, the Bureau had actively increased the danger to the public. The political fallout was swift. Environment Minister Murray Watt publicly stated the overhaul was not meeting expectations. Opposition MPs labeled it a tech boondoggle. But the core issue was a classic battle between familiarity and functionality. The old site looked like a 2012 intranet, ugly, dense, and tiny fonts. But it exposed raw data brutally and directly. Power users loved it. The new site chased modern web trends, big tiles, mobile-first grids, lots of whitespace. For a casual user checking the temperature in Melbourne, it was arguably an upgrade. But for the power users, the people who watch the weather for a living, the interface felt like a betrayal. It sacrificed information density for aesthetic cleanliness. Inside the Bureau's headquarters, the tone shifted from triumph to damage control. Leadership apologized, admitting the launch was challenging. They insisted that the back-end systems, that $79 million investment, were working perfectly. The forecasts were accurate. The warnings were being generated. But because the website front end was a mess, none of that mattered to the public. This brings us to the critical lesson for every tech lead and project manager watching. You cannot separate the back-end value from the front-end experience. You can build the most sophisticated data pipeline in the world, but if the user interface fails to deliver that data effectively, your project is a failure. The user doesn't care about your supercomputer. They care about what loads on their phone at 2 a.m. when the wind is howling. The Bureau is now in a scramble to fix the broken forecast. They are rolling out updates, reinstating links to legacy data, and trying to rebuild trust. But the damage is done. They turned a messy government IT project into a global case study on how to burn nearly $100 million overnight. So, was it a $96 million website? Technically, no. It was an expensive data platform with a cheap paint job. But in the court of public opinion, perception is reality. And when that reality puts lives at risk, the price tag becomes irrelevant compared to the cost of failure. If you enjoyed this deep dive into digital disaster, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We cover the biggest tech failures and successes every week. Let me know in the comments, have you ever used a modern redesign that was worse than the original? I'll see you in the next one.